And we know it's important to communicate what's going on across our pipeline system and with our operations, with all our governmental partners. And then there is a lot of entities within the government that don't regulate us, like CISA, up to May 7th, that we also have had constant communications going on. So I know from my CIO's perspective, she does spend a lot of time with CISA. She does spend a lot of time with the TSA, talking about what's going on in the cyberspace and defenses and things like that. And I'll go back to May 7th, and what I saw as being most helpful for an operator that's been, subject to an attack is, again, that was critical for us to be able to have that one central conduit in the government. And in this case, it was DOE, who allowed us to communicate everything that was going on at the time through one central conduit, although all the parties that you mentioned were sitting at that table, virtually, of course, because of COVID, hearing material real time that could help them go about doing their job, or potentially could go about helping the market resolve the issue that we saw. So we saw a lot of permitting changes, allowing truck drivers to drive longer hours, allowing trucks to carry more fuel. That was the kind of coordination that we got through that central conduit that the White House gave us. And again, I'm not saying one entity over the other. I'm saying that the combination of all of them through that central conduit was extremely valuable to our response, extremely valuable to the American public to get as much fuel back into the system as we possibly could, and whether that's through deviations in regulations or things that allowed us to bring our pipeline on much sooner than perhaps would have been.
Good. Maybe one other question. How quickly did your company reach out to the FBI?
Senator, great question. We reached out to the FBI within hours.
And what was the response?
The response, Senator, was we want to get you back on a phone call. We're going to bring CISA into the conversation, and we're going to start going through it. And I think part of that was we called the Atlanta office, and in this particular case, they felt it was dark side, and the FBI has an office specifically dedicated. They call it a Center of Excellence for dark side. So they're dark side experts, which are California-based. So again, as early as we called in the morning, I mean, I know the FBI probably responds regardless of the hour of the day. It was pretty early in California when we made our call to the Atlanta office, but great response on the part of the FBI.
Good. How about the response from CISA? That would be my last question. How about the response to CISA?
Senator, of course, I wasn't involved in those conversations, but what I saw as a result of CISA being involved in those conversations was the ability to take some of the forensic evidence that the FBI was comfortable seeing released to the public, wind up in CISA notifications that would then help light companies, and certainly a lot of pipeline companies, take a look at like IPS addresses and things like that we had shared during that phone call, and get that out in memo form to other operators. So great sharing of information on the part of CISA.
Good. Thanks very much for joining us. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start out by, again, emphasizing and pointing out that you were the victim of a crime. You're not the bad guy here, and I appreciate my colleagues. I pretty well acknowledge that as well, and I think that's been reflected in their line of questioning. I want to, because a lot of people can do Monday morning quarterbacking, and it's easy for federal agencies to say, don't pay ransoms because it just encourages more. But I just kind of want you to, for the record, lay out how much worse could have it been had you not made that very difficult decision to kind of bite the bullet so that you could get your pipelines back up and operational.
Senator, first, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for your question as well. That's an unknown we probably don't want to know, and it may be an unknown that we don't want to play out in a public forum. But if you start to look at the fact that it took us from Friday all the way to Wednesday afternoon the following, and we already started to see pandemonium going on in the markets, people doing unsafe things like filling garbage bags full of gasoline, or people fist fighting in line at the fuel pump. The concern would be, what would happen if it had stretched on beyond that amount of time, right? What would happen at the airports where we supply a lot of jet fuel, let alone what might happen to the gas pump? My concern the first day was more to the first responders and the ambulances and the things that we count on in emergencies beyond our own current emergency. That was my concern that first day. So again, our focus and our team's focus, regardless of what type of threat we see, is to identify the threat, contain the threat, remediate and restore. And that goes beyond just, an incident like that. That's about anything that we see as unsafe. And that's why the call that morning by that head controller, supervisor of the control room to shut the pipeline down was so critical.
Okay, again, I think that's an appropriate response, and I'll leave it to people's imagination, but I want people thinking about that as well.
Yes, sir.
Cyber attacks are an ongoing problem. There's no easy solution. As you said in your testimony, the criminals are on the offense, and they have a huge advantage. And it doesn't take much in terms of vulnerability, no matter how strong your IT systems are, your cybersecurity systems are, they're vulnerabilities, and they get exploited, and these guys becoming more and more susceptible to this. In terms of government versus private sector, from my standpoint, I think CISA is very valuable from the standpoint of sharing information preemptively, try and stop some of these things. We've heard in testimony 90% of these attacks can be prevented just by basic cyber hygiene. It certainly sounds like you had pretty sophisticated cyber hygiene, although obviously vulnerabilities. Federal government can hold nation states accountable that are allowing these cyber attackers to operate on their foreign soil. And then, of course, hold them accountable when something happens, but also help in recovery and law enforcement. I'm not convinced that federal government is going to be particularly effective at issuing standards and keeping them up to date. So I really look at the private sector being far more nimble at that. One of the processes I've proposed is using a private sector model like an ISO certification. I imagine you go through something like that. I did. You have 6-month surveillance audits. You tie that to insurance system as well, where your rates are based on how good you achieve the standards. I mean, that's a system that will be as nimble as the private sector can be, is up to date, be able to employ the absolute best cybersecurity experts, which is one of the problems with the government. I'm not, again, it's just a problem. Government can't pay to retain the absolute best talent across the board. I just kind of want your thoughts on that type of framework, public versus private.
Senator, thank you. And I think those are all very good thoughts. I think, again, we have an obligation as private entity to make sure that our systems are as capable as they possibly can be. And we have a responsibility to continue to look at those systems because, as we all know, the threat continues to evolve, the sophistication of the players continues to evolve, their ability to compromise systems continually evolves. And I think in combination with the government, together combined, we have a much better ability as Americans to thwart the threat of cyber attacks. And I think that, again, we both have a responsibility. You shared the concept of private industry can't do things to foreign governments, can't put pressure on foreign government. That's extremely important here if we look at where these criminals are housed, right? That something needs to be done there. So again, I think that private-public partnership is very valuable, but we certainly know we have responsibilities and accountability as well.
Again, I'm concerned about the government's capability of establishing the standards, and then, again, penalizing businesses for being victims of crime if you don't meet their probably in many cases out-of-date standards. So I would proceed down that line with caution. Just real quick, were you a member of an ISAC, an Information Sharing and Analysis Center for your industry?
Senator, I don't actually know the answer to that. If I can get back to you on that.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And the final question I have is, in our briefing and news reports, it wasn't just the shutdown, the ransomware, but it was, prior to them shutting you down, they extracted all kinds of data that apparently they tend to reveal or not reveal. Can you just describe that, if possible? Because I'm intrigued is maybe the wrong word, but I thought that was quite interesting. And do you have any assurances? Did you get that data back? Was that part of the ransom deal that won't be disclosed? And can you kind of tell us what kind of data they're talking about? Why that'd even be valuable for them or hurtful for that to be disclosed? Senator,
Very, very good question, very important question. As part of the ransomware note, they tell you that they've encrypted information, that they've exfiltrated information. So we knew that they had exfiltrated information. We worked very closely with the FBI on that, and the FBI is probably the best entity to respond to that since they're still, investigating the situation and, getting closer apparently to, at least we hope, to the perpetrators themselves.
But would that be personal information from your employees that would be valuable, or just trade secrets? You're a public company, so the financial information is available. I'm just kind of wondering what threat that represents to your entity or to your employees.
Senator, what we know about that material right now is it was exfiltrated off the share drive, so it contains a lot of different type of material. The good news is it was retrieved very quickly. It was brought back in. And again, I think the FBI can talk a little bit more about that than I feel comfortable right now because of their investigation. Okay. But again, the fact that it was retrieved very quickly is helpful. We don't fully understand everything that's in it because of where it's been held since it was retrieved. But we have people obviously involved in the combined process who have been looking very closely at that data. Okay,
listen, I appreciate you coming in here and being as forthright as you've become, so thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Senator Hassan, you are recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Peters, and thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for this hearing today. And thank you, Mr. Blunt, for being willing to come before the committee today. Cybersecurity is a collaborative effort, to be sure, and we need to work together to strengthen public and private cyber defenses. Mr. Blount, I was glad to see that U.S. authorities were able to deprive hackers of millions of dollars in expected ransom. However, I want to better understand your decision to pay the ransom, and I understand it was a difficult decision. As you've already discussed, the FBI and other federal agencies strongly discourage paying ransom because it incentivizes more people to become cyber criminals and to develop better ransomware tools. When you decided to pay the ransom, did you know how much of your network was affected at the time?
Thank you for that question, and good morning again.
Good morning.
No, we did not, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand in these incidents, these attacks. It takes you days, basically, to see into your system that's been corrupted as to what you have, what's potentially been exfiltrated. In the case of Colonial, we had really good backups, is what I've been told by Mandiant, but it still took them days to get through those backups. So when we look at our response time and ability to bring the system back up, it was fairly good in reality. My concern was you don't have that view at all for days, and when you have a critical asset like this, you've got to focus on what is the best opportunity of options you have in front of you to take avail of. And in that case, it was to get the encryption tool and to get our information back.
Okay, so I wanted to follow up. You mentioned the federal agencies that you reached out to, but what, if any, outside of those agencies, non-federal entities, did you consult with? Were there private firms that you consulted with?
Yes, Senator, great question. Obviously, we talked to Mandiant.
Yeah.
We talked to Mandiant about that. We talked to our legal resources that have been involved in any number of cyber cases in the U.S. over the last couple of years. People that have had real-time experience with these criminals, as well as the specific science of cyber attacks and compromise. So yes, a lot of conversation went into that decision that I made.
Sure.
To negotiate.
Okay, and did you have a cybersecurity response plan in place prior to the attack? And if so, did it include any guidance about paying a ransom?
Senator, great question. What we have as a pipeline operator, and it would be not unique necessarily to us at Colonial, is we have an emergency response process.
Right.
And again, I've said earlier this morning, see the threat, contain the threat, remediate the threat, and restore. So in this case, you use the same process, but you use a different set of experts. So in this case, we reached out immediately to FBI because it was criminal.
Right.
We immediately reached out to legal resources that have dealt with this. We immediately reached out to Mandiant.
Right, but my question is, in your planning, did you have a plan for cybersecurity response that included guidance about ransomware?
Senator, specifically, no discussion about ransom and action to ransom.
And did your team do tabletop drills, for instance, to go through an actual simulated cyber attack before this happened?
Senator, yes, we do participate in those with various groups, as well as do them on our own at Colonial.
Okay. Some private sector companies can focus strictly on economics and perform traditional cost-benefit analyses without having to consider national security concerns. However, owners and operators of critical infrastructure, and I appreciate your comments this morning acknowledging that Colonial oversees critical infrastructure, that carries a heightened obligation and duty to be capable of delivering goods and services to citizens all, in this case, up and down the East Coast. Mr. Blount, Colonial Pipeline surely performed some number of cost-benefit analyses regarding the operation of its pipeline to determine how much to spend on pipeline hardware, personnel, and even cybersecurity. Did any of your analyses incorporate any public responsibility factors, such as the impact of a potential cyber attack on consumers or on the U.S. economy?
Senator, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that we approached it that way. We know our number one goal at Colonial is to safely and securely operate that pipeline because we've known for 57 years the importance of that pipeline to the well-being of the American citizen. So that's always been our focus. Our investment, whether it's in pipeline integrity,
right,
or whether it's in cyberware and IT, is all derived around keeping safe and protecting the asset because of what its main benefit is to the United States.
Okay, I understand that and I appreciate that answer, but you know, as you've had conversations with other senators this morning, you've mentioned that you didn't have two-step authentication in place. You've mentioned a legacy VPN, which in my understanding means it was a pretty old VPN. So I don't think it's acceptable to understand the critical nature of your product, but then not really have the preparation and the system in place to protect it as if it's critical infrastructure. You really do have an obligation to U.S. communities that you serve and to consumers and to our national security. So I am concerned that it doesn't seem to have been a formal factor in your analysis of how much to strengthen your systems.
Senator, we take cybersecurity very seriously. I did reference earlier that the VPN was a legacy VPN.
Yep.
We could not see, and it did not show up in any pen testing. That's unfortunate. But again, the safety and security of the system is highly critical. We've never had our board deny us any funds associated with safety and security, whether it's on the IT side or the physical side of the pipe. If my CIO wants funds, she gets them.
Okay. I would just, and this is an issue that I think we're seeing across the board on cyber, we need to start imagining what can happen and respond accordingly as opposed to always be looking at what the last problem was, right? And really investing. And for critical infrastructure, I think it's absolutely important that we have standards that really make sure that companies are investing in the kind of infrastructure they need. I have another question. I am running out of time, so I'll submit it for the record, but I really would like to get your thoughts about what kind of information, public-private information sharing needs to happen, between and among whom and at what level, because I think that's another important piece to this whole issue. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan, for your questions. The chair recognizes Senator Langford for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blunt, thanks for being here. There is no CEO in America that wants to be sitting in the same chair you're sitting in right now. To be able to go through all this, you're a month past a major attack. Obviously, there's a lot of work that you're going through. Can I back up for Colonial? When is the last time the Colonial, that pipeline was down and not providing fuel to the East Coast?
Senator, that's a great question. That pipeline has never been down completely, with the exception of, and I learned that just this week, over the couple hours of Y2K, and we can all appreciate going back in time that we were all concerned about the clock back then. So, periodically from time to time, we'll have portion of the system down during a hurricane event or something like that, but never the entire system at one time, and never for that, obviously, that duration of time.
I think we as Americans get so used to going to the gas pump and filling up with refined products. Every one of us has landed at Charlotte Airport, and Jet A has been added to our plane as we change planes there. We get so used to that, we lose track of some of these things. So I want to ask a couple of things here. You had to do a physical inspection and a cyber inspection of this pipeline, or just going through the digital portion of it? It also has to do some physical inspection as well.
Yeah, great question. So, in the early hours of May 7th, we didn't know exactly what we had. We had the ransomware, but again, we're always concerned about the security of the pipeline. And you may have read in the press, it's a factual statement, we drove over 29,000 miles of the pipeline. And again, remember, it's only a 5,500-mile pipeline. So we had constant ground surveillance. In addition, we also fly the pipeline. It's a PHMSA regulation that we fly the pipeline. We fly in excess of that regulation on a normal basis. And on top of that, even double up our efforts during this point in time. Again, we didn't know that it was just a cyber attack. We had to make sure that it wasn't potentially an attack on our physical structure as well.
So that was completed. There were no other physical damage that you could identify.
That is correct, Senator. We didn't see anything. We did keep an eye, obviously, on the pipeline, just so you're aware. We kept the pipeline under pressure